Anyway, I've been in office 3 years. I ran up here twice and I lost twice. But as Chris knows, you know, if you want to be in politics, you've got to stay on top of it. You've got to keep trying and not get discouraged. And so if I say anything to you, and I encourage you all to run for office, is to hang in there, because that's not easy. A lot of slings and arrows come your way, but you learn a lot about yourself when you lose, especially. Losing, you learn more about yourself than you ever do when you win the first time. But so the third time I ran, I won, and I got elected. And we have a problem up here in this county. It's divided. Those who want to control the county, and they've controlled it for years. You can call them the good old boys, you can call them whatever you want. And the upstarts, the people that want change. And David and I are the change. They don't control us. They don't like it. They're losing their power up here. And we have a mayor election coming up, and if they lose that election, the whole balance of power up here, political power, is shifted. And so we're up against a pretty entrenched group that has a lot of money and spends a lot of money for their elections. And if they don't like you, they come after you. And that's to be expected. So I've been in the House. I'm now the transportation chairman. And because this city is sitting on the epicenter of a tsunami, a hurricane is brewing right over the top of us. And it has to do with the pension liability that this city owes its police and fire officers. We are so far underwater to our liability, what we owe for our retirees, that the city has come up with this sales tax increase of 40% to try to put towards the liability of the pension fund. Just so you know, the pension fund statewide is financed or is funded at about 46%, which means for every dollar of liability that state owes to all their firefighters and police officers and judges and corrections officers, they only have 46 cents to pay for it. That's not sustainable. And this city here is even worse than the average. Our police, I think, are funded at 24%, and our firefighters at 29%. So you cannot sustain that kind of a liability in long term. And so therein lies, how do you solve that problem? Well, the city's answer is to raise sales tax by 40%. That's a lot of money. And Mr. Stringer and I oppose that. I, at first, was lukewarm towards it, and I did support it, but then I found out that our city had $123.5 million in a fund, in three accounts, that they could have used if they chose to do that. They could have allowed the money to be borrowed against that, or they could have taken the funds out and started paying the liability. They did none of that, and they have trying to go to the voters to raise taxes by 40%. And we don't think that's right, and so we've opposed that. This liability statewide is the sword of Damocles hanging over the state. It is the biggest financial problem coming. And as you as young Republicans are going to have to live with it.
No, why don't you tell a little bit about some of the problems with the drop and the public benefit increase and the $100 million in advisory fees and stuff like that?
In the past, the legislature gave really generous benefits to police and fire. They gave what was called the DROP, Deferred Option Retirement Plan. And this allowed a police or fire officer or police to retire on paper, and his retirement that he would start drawing went into a separate account. And he worked for 5 more years for the city or the county at his highest salary, and while he's working at this highest salary, he's putting no money into the retirement pension fund at all. And when he then, at 5 years he retires, he takes a lump sum plus interest compounded at 7.4%. I'll just run this, make it short. We've had fire police officers retire with $900,000 lump sum payments. That's outrageous. That cannot be sustained, and we can't stop it. And most people don't know about it. And you should know about it because you're going to be paying for it. And when this system goes belly up, they're going to be looking for answers, and I don't know if there are any answers. Because if we can't stop that kind of egregious stuff, we can't stop anything. And another egregious benefit we gave in Prop 124 is we allowed there's 3 tiers of employees in police and fire. Tiers 1, Tiers 2, and Tiers 3. Tier 3 is the new tier, starts July 1st of this year. We don't have one new employee in Tier 3 statewide. So we're only talking about retired and those who are working right now, who got hired on before the 1st of July of 2012. They automatically, in Tier 1 and 2, get a 2% COLA compounded. Now think about this. I don't know if you understand. I really want to go over the math here a little bit. If you're getting $100 and you have a 2% COLA, that's $102 that year. The next year, it's 2% on 102, and it compounds every year. And in 10 years, instead of being $100, it's $140 because of this compounding effect. These officers will get a 2% compounded COLA no matter what the pension fund does. It's not sustainable. The pension fund right now is below water, and they're taking more money out of it to pay these 2% COLAs compounded. The new hires don't get a COLA unless the fund is at least 70%. And as I told you, the fund is at 46% now, and is not likely to ever get back up, in my opinion. And so this state is facing the greatest financial calamity, as many states are, and everybody's got their head in the sand, except Mr. Stringer and myself, who have this committee to try to come up with some solutions. Yeah, Barry.
So like at my work, we have to hit certain inflation targets for our contracts with our vendors in order to do COLA. So like I know for some of the contracts that I've audited for the 5 last years, inflation has been so low, there's been zero COLA. So like our contracts with Dell, NTT, Cerner, will be like, hey, inflation's not high enough for any cost of living adjustment. Why do they get a cost of living adjustment when inflation?
They get a cost of living adjustment because that's what their unions wanted. And their unions have such strength in the legislature, they can pretty much pass anything they want. And that's God's truth. We had a bill that came through last year. Mr. String and I voted against it, and 2 other Republicans. 4 out of 60 voted against a bill that was supported by the unions, the firefighter unions. That just goes to show you the strength that the police and fire unions have in this state. And they're not about to give up any benefits, I'm telling you. I was told that you would see a lien on your house before you ever saw a concession from these guys. Excuse me. I can't talk right now. I'm with the young Republicans. I'll call you Mr. Anyway, I don't want to take up any more time. I just want to tell you about this thing. So,
did you want to do something always in the perfect time?
Okay, David, take over.
All right, sir. All right, I will.
Well, I just wanted to tell you, I mean, I grew up in Illinois, and my dad was a civil servant well before these economic calamities were coming at us. And at a 2% rate, each pension will double in 36 years with the rule of 72. Are these benefits enshrined in the Arizona State Constitution?
No, the constitutional provision prevents the courts from modifying any of these egregious contracts. We tried to do that, and the courts in the Hall-Parker case said, no, you can't make these officers contribute more to their retirement because that's a diminution of their retirement benefits. That's stretching the logic. And remember, the Supreme Court is covered under EORP. They're part of that system. So why they would be part of this judge's ruling, I can't understand. I'm not an attorney.
They should accuse themselves.
They should, but it is a Houdini type lock. You can't figure out how to crack this thing. So all we can do, and what's happening are cities and towns are under distress. The city of Bisbee is funded at 5%. That means for every dollar they owe in pension liability, they have a nickel. It's not sustainable. And so what they tried to do is Band-Aid fix it by allowing the 20-year amortization to go to 30 years so that these cities and counties can make their payments, but at the end there's a balloon payment of millions. The city of Phoenix will have a $2.5 billion add-on when they went from 20 to 30 years to finances.
And that's billion with a B.
Billion, right, 2.5 billion more. I'll let David take over here now.
Okay, I'll start again. Good morning, good afternoon, I should say. Of course, most of you know me, maybe a few of you don't. My name is Representative David Stringer. I am a freshman. I guess I've been a legislature all of about 8 months now. I was sworn in January of this year. And I'm basically in the state legislature because of this gentleman right here who endorsed me. Noel had to run. Noel ran clean elections. He ran a couple of times, sort of dry runs. The third time he made it. I was lucky enough to make it the first time, and that's largely because I had a lot of support. So I'm very grateful, and I have a deep debt to Noel Campbell. We actually sit right next to each other on the floor of the House of Representatives, and he really is a mentor to me. And so I have a lot of respect and a lot of appreciation for what Noel is doing. I want to touch a little bit on PSPRS and how this came about, that Noel and I, both from the same district, ended up being chair and vice chair of this committee. And it had a lot to do with what was going on here in Prescott, because February, March of this year, our city council started talking about proposing a very substantial tax increase, 0.75, which works out to be about 37.5% of our existing sales tax. A very substantial sales tax. It raises about $10, maybe $11 million a year. It can go on for 10 years. Over $100 million in new tax revenue raised right from the city of Prescott. It's not a county tax. It's a city limited to the city of Prescott. That's a huge amount of money for a city of 40,000 people to be raising over 10 years. And all of that money will be sent to Phoenix. None of it will be spent here in Prescott. It will all be sent to Phoenix, to the same PSPRS pension board, who has arguably mismanaged the funds, or at least returned substandard returns on their investment for many years. They have an expected rate of return. It was about 7.6%. They've now revised that down to 7.5%. But the PSPRS pension system has not returned their expected rate of return for 28 years. And that's why they have sort of run the system into the ditch. It's below 50%. They simply cannot recover without some kind of massive infusion of taxes. Now here in Prescott, we owe, it started out about $70 million, and now it's been ratcheted up to $78 million. I've now heard a new figure of $8.2 million. And the reason it keeps going up is not because Prescott isn't paying their fair share or paying their annual assessment. It's because the assets in the fund keep changing and the liabilities of the fund keep growing. So no matter how much money we shovel into the fund, the unfunded liability can continue to grow. So it's not something that Prescott really has control over, no matter how much money we put in the system. So I just wanted to point that out. So Noel and I one day were just talking about this, and they said, you know, we really need to do something about that. So we just asked the chief of staff for a meeting with the Speaker of the House, J.D. Mesnard, and we just marched in, Noel and I together, and talked to him for about 15-20 minutes, laid out the problem, and he says, okay, sure, you guys can have an ad hoc committee. And Noel, you'll be chairman, and David, you'll be vice chairman, and you can, and we'll get some other members, and you'll be an official ad hoc committee. So I think he did that maybe without a lot of thought about what we were going to try to do with it. But we took that and we fleshed out the committee. We've got 5 members, 7 members actually. I'm sorry, we have two Democrats on the committee. Bob Thorpe up in Flagstaff is on the committee. David Livingston is on the committee. David Cook is on the committee. And there's a couple of Democrats on the committee. But in any event, Noel and I then just developed this program to go around the state. I think we're going to do 5, maybe 6 cities, and then do a number of meetings down in Phoenix with state boards. But we want to go around to the affected communities. We started out in Flagstaff, we went down to Bisbee, which was really the basket case of Arizona with respect to the pension liabilities. We were going to do an ad hoc committee hearing in Prescott on the 26th of July, and I won't mention names, but some of our political colleagues here pulled the plug on us. They actually went to the speaker with a bogus claim that we were going to impact the outcome of the election here in Prescott, and state committees and organizations are not allowed to do that. So it's kind of a bogus argument, but anyway, we had to convert our ad hoc committee meeting to a town hall. It ended up working out okay, about 150 people showed up. But in any event, our next meeting, then we had a meeting down in Phoenix with PSPRS, the Reason Foundation, the Arizona Tax Foundation. We're going to be going to Miami Globe, we're going to be going to Yuma, probably Tucson, and then back to the Campbell to do the remainder of our meetings. We're hoping to finish up sometime in April and then do a report with our findings and our recommendations about what needs to be done to change or improve the PSPR system. And we are probably, can't say what we're going to do because we haven't taken the vote yet, but it's very likely that we're going to end up with a proposal that we need to take a look at the state constitution, the pension clause in our state constitution, because that's what's really blocking reform. And happily, I know Noel is kind of pessimistic about this. I'm a little bit more optimistic because one of our committee members, David Livingston, is a representative from Peoria. His wife, Tracy Livingston, is the one who's running for state superintendent of schools. He has already indicated that he will sponsor legislation to refer the pension clause back to the voters. Our state Senate President, Steve Yarborough, has been quoted in the Arizona Republic saying he too believes we need to take another look at the state pension clause in the state constitution. Now, this is still a very, very heavy lift, but we're starting to get some support and we're starting to get some realization around the state that something drastic needs to be done. Maybe we don't need to repeal the pension clause. Maybe we just need to do a workaround to get a fix. We don't know exactly what the contours are going to be, but something is going to have to happen. Or the whole thing is just going to collapse. We can put Band-Aids on it for a while, but eventually it's going to collapse. And one of the Band-Aids that we're looking at here in Prescott is this tax proposal, Proposition 443, which will, as Noel told you, will raise our tax 0.75%, 37.5% over the next 10 years. This is the proposal for Prescott. It's not going to solve the problem. And one of the things that has happened rather dramatically, very recently, that Noel alluded to, is that about a week and a half ago, Noel got access to an internal financial document, an internal financial report from the city of Prescott, from our financial director, Mark Woodfull, through the city manager, Mr. Lamar, Michael Lamar, and the recipient, the person it was addressed to, has actually been blacked out. We don't know who that memo was sent to, but we know that it came from the city. And it indicated that they had $123.5 million in the bank. We were never told this. The mayor of our city, Harry Oberg, says he was never told that. He himself did not know that. So if the mayor doesn't know that, only the city bureaucrats know this information and keep it to themselves. So we were told, we finally, after a lot of prodding, were told that the city of Prescott had about $30 million in reserves. So we use that in some of our campaign material, saying, the city has $30 million. That's enough to tide us over until the legislature can do a fix. That maybe could last us 2, 3, 4 years. We had no idea it was $123.5 million. As Noel said, if our liability is 78 or 82, that's enough money to pay off the entire liability and still have $40 million left over for operating reserves for our city. So there's been a hoax, we think, perpetrated on the voters of Prescott. We are now getting that message out. And one of the ways we're getting that message out, the fact that the story was actually broken by myself in a column in Prescott E-News. I want to get a little bit later to Prescott E-News and how I think some of you guys can be helpful going forward in your own communities. But basically, I have an interest in Prescott E-News. I have a column, a weekly column that I've just started, and in my very first column, August 14th, I broke this story, and we linked the column to copies of the documents themselves. So the readers of the online column can actually look at the documents. Now this has actually been explosive. It's been on the radio. I think the Courier is now going to be covering it. They said today they were going to be covering it tomorrow. It is explosive information. Some of the talk radio hosts here in Prescott are now talking about this. It has created a tremendous buzz and a tremendous backlash, quite frankly, against the city of Prescott, because we were never told this. This is like our own government officials who we trusted were not telling us what the true state of our finances were. So we think this could be a game changer in the election. It could have a dramatic effect on the election. Unfortunately, the information didn't come out until about a week into voting, a week or 10 days into voting. So we don't know if it's going to change the outcome, but it could. The feedback we're getting is that people who know about this are very, very concerned and very, very upset. So I want to just wind up here by talking a little bit about the Arizona Young Republicans. Now, Perry and I go way back, and I want to thank the Arizona Young Republicans, two guys who are here. This is our voter guide, and this is what everybody who's voting here in Prescott got, and it tells you basically what the propositions are, who the candidates are, and it allows voters to file statements. And the people who are supporting Proposition 443 have filed 21 statements. Who are these folks? Well, a lot of them are local citizens, but you'll recognize some of the names. How about Karen Fan? Yes, on 443. She filed a statement, paid $100 to get her name in this voter guide. How about former Senator Steve Pierce in the guide supporting 443? How about former Secretary of State Ken Bennett? $100, yes, on 443, right? So some very prominent establishment politicians have filed statements in favor of the tax increase that I've just told you about. But there are six statements filed in opposition. The reason there's only 6 is because they cost $100 a piece. So the yes people, the people who want to impose this tax on you, they're very well funded, and they were able to file 21 statements at $100 a pop. We filed 6, and one of them was filed by myself, Matthew Perry filed one, and Chris Campbell filed one. So I want to thank you guys for getting in the voter guide and helping inform the voters of Prescott on why Prop 443 is a bad idea. This is something we need to do across the state. This is the second, or maybe the third, meeting that I've been to for the state Arizona Young Republicans. And I have to say, the last couple of meetings I've been to have not been well attended. And that really puzzles me, because this is pretty much a red state. There's a lot of Republican voters in this state. Where are your colleagues? Where is your commitment? Why aren't we getting the message out? Well, what I'm doing is I ran for public office. I just turned 70 years old, by the way. I'm coming to this very, very late in life. But if you're passionate about making a difference in our community and in our state, you have to make sacrifices. You have to get involved. You have to get the word out. So I've run for office. I was lucky. I've succeeded. And the other thing I'm doing is Prescott E-News. And the reason I'm doing Prescott E-News, and I don't control the editorial policies of Prescott E-News. This is my boss, Lynn LeMaster. She is the managing editor of Prescott E-News, and she has the final say on editorial policy. But I do have my column, and I do get to talk to Lynn. So you need to get involved. You need to start right. Not everybody can go out and buy an interest in a newspaper or in an online publication. I understand that. But you need to do what you can, and you need to start now. Steve Bannon, we just got apparently fired by, or at least a negotiated resignation from the Trump White House. He's in the online publications today saying that he thinks we need a new network. He wants to start a new TV network that is to the right of Fox News. Many of you know that after the events in Charlottesville, some of the major carriers, some of the main, what are they called, servers, like Google and so on like that, they are trying to close down some of these right-wing or alt-right publications. Now, some of these alt-right publications are pretty far out there, all right? I'm not defending or agreeing with what they say. You got the Klan, and you've got a number of these organizations who are on the internet. So I'm not defending what they say, but I am concerned about free speech. Once you start setting a litmus test about what's acceptable speech and what isn't, then we are all fair game once we set that precedent. So I'm happy to see the Marxists and the socialists and the liberal Democrats having their website. They're welcome to it. But I think all views should be allowed to express themselves, and the views that are unworthy and fail to gather support, they will die out. But you need to hear these views and expose them for what they are. You don't silence them. That's a huge mistake. So what we have to do as conservatives is we have to be able to get our message out. And the way we do that is through the media. So I'm supporting Mr. Bannon. I hope he does it. I hope he's able to set up a news network. We may have to set up our own web servers to get our message out, because I think they're going to come after us. If they can shut down the alt-right, then they're going to shut down conservative Republicans. That's hate speech too. And then it's not just the conservative Republicans, it's all Republicans. Okay? So you see where this goes. Where do you draw the line? How do you stop it? We may end up needing to have our own servers. And that's the kind of thing that, you're young guys, you need to be entrepreneurial, you need to be creative, and and you need to be thinking about these things in your own communities. You need to be writing letters. You need to be establishing relationships with the media and the journalists and getting our message out. Because if we don't, their message is getting out there, and we are not going to be heard. So anyway, that's my pitch for you today. Thanks for having me here. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Sure.
I have another question about the pension plans. I mean, I've been obviously doing a lot of reading about it. My dad has one of these pensions, and it's already doubled. He's lived long enough for this to double from the People's Republic of Illinois, which used to have say in government. So one thing I did read is that in a lot of states, almost all of them, it sounds like, is that there's almost two sets of books. There are the ones that you can kind of find if you were a civilian, and then there's the real books that show how bad things are. So are you guys, are we able to access the real books? Or are we talking about some phantom that they put out
I'll
there?
address that. First of all, by statute, this board controls hiring, investment strategy. They run everything. They run absolutely everything. The cities and the counties have nothing to do with the investments that they pay into the system. Prescott paid in last year they're paying in this year $7.5 million. They have no say whatsoever on how that money's invested. It goes to this board. Now this board is made up of supposedly 9 members. 4 represent police and fire. They don't have to have any expertise in the board of financial strategy or investment. The other 4 have to have at least 10 years experience in investment strategy, and they represent the counties and cities. The 9th member, who's appointed by the governor, by statute, should have been appointed the 1st of January of this year, has not been appointed. Governor Ducey has not made the 9th appointment. He has appointed Brian Tobin, who's in the firefighters union, as the board chairman. So police and fire unions control the board because there's 8 members and he's the chairman. Question is why? My feeling is he wants their support for re-election. And who wants to go against police and fire? That's motherhood and apple pie. You don't take these guys on. I mean, they're going to come after David and I. There's no doubt about it, but we're trying to save this system. Because if this system goes belly up, and it will, and it goes into Chapter 9 in the federal courts, that will supersede any state constitutional provision, and these firefighters and police officers will start taking haircuts, just as they have in other Detroit. So if we can somehow, I was part of Prop 124. These were the changes that were made that created the new tier that capped the well, as it were, and it takes 30 years to clean up the mess. Okay? Even if that were to be true, and I'm not sure it is, I don't believe it is, they're not going to be cities and counties and fire districts that are going to last 30 years under these payments. They can't do it. And you guys talk about hiding the truth of the liability. Everything in this fund hinges on an expected rate of return. There's a lot of other assumptions, but the major one is, what will this fund earn over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years that will bring in enough revenue to shorten the distance between what we owe and what we actually have to pay out of the fund, okay? The expected rate of return has been around 7.5%. They haven't made that in 10 years. That's why the liability keeps getting greater. If we were to average a 5% return, which is probably pretty good on average for 10 years, 5%, that's 2.5% difference. Each quarter point of a percent is a 10% increase in the liability. So at 2.5%, okay, that's 10 points, or 100% increase in the liability. The true liability is really twice what they're telling us it is, because they're using an expected rate of return that never materializes. Okay? But what that does is allow the cities and counties and fire districts to make lower payments. Okay? But I don't care what I say, I don't care what they say. The math has a progression, a calculus of its own. And you cannot deny that. And so every year we see what the liability is, it's greater. The unfunded liability gets greater every year. David?
Yeah, and you finally touched on the point. I think it's important to understand. So putting more money into the system isn't going to solve the problem, because as they ratchet down the expected rate of return to get it closer to something that's more realistic, it will double 72 or 78 or 84 million dollars, whatever it happens to be, could be 150, 160 million dollars. So pouring more money, you never get caught up. You're always falling further behind.
What you can do, you know, everybody, down here in Prescott, they say the legislature's got to fix this problem. The legislator created it. The legislature has to resolve it. That's all true, but it's nonsense, because the legislature doesn't want to touch this problem with a 10-foot pole, because it's really tough. You have to go against the police and fire unions. You have to change the Constitution. It's like pulling teeth. Nobody wants to do it. And it's amazing how uneducated the legislators are. Not only uneducated, but profoundly stupid and uncaring about this problem. Okay, and that's the truth. And we know that because we see it. They don't want to talk about the issue. But you, at your level, first thing you can do is, whatever city or county you're from, you can go on with your website and you can find out what the unfunded liability is for your city and county. They're pretty bad. And then you can go to your state representative and say, what the hell are you doing about this? Why aren't you concerned about this? They're not feeling the heat. And when they start feeling the heat like David and I feel the heat, because we get it all the time from our city council, you got to do something. You got to save us, you know. And it's not happening statewide. So go back to your communities and really pound on them and start making them aware.
I understand part of the issue is that we're paying way too much in bankers' fees. Like instead of putting them in.
The investment strategy has been horrible. I say it like this: the pension board's like a football team that's lost 9 games in a row, and now all of a sudden they're going to tell us how they're going to win the 10th game. You go, well, I don't know. You look at your record, and now you're going to do so well. Their investment strategy needs to be looked at by people outside of the board, and for that to happen, they got to spend money and hire somebody, not the board, the House or the Senate. They don't want to do that. They don't want to bring in outside people to really look at this because they don't really want to solve it.
Shouldn't they send in like Deloitte or like?
You got to have
Ernst
smart
Young?
people who have investment strategy can look at this. Well, what we had outside the what was it? Somebody rated our pension as the 3rd worst in the country in municipal pensions. The 3rd worst.
I think it was the Pew.
Pew.
Yeah.
They looked at what we've done here and said, and when you talk to the board, you know, happy talk. That's what I call it, happy talk. Whatever you get from these guys is happy talk. And we don't have anybody to, other than Pew looked at this and said, you guys suck. You know, you're the 3rd worst of their peer group. And now they're telling us that they're better than that in their peer group. But we've been in the bull market now for what, 8 years, 9 years? If you look at the other state investment strategies, Treasury, state treasurer, they made 11%. They're doing well. ARS is doing as well. That's the other retirement for teachers, Arizona retirement system. They're funded at I think 73%. They need to be better funded, but they don't have this drop program. They don't have these egregious benefits that the police and fire were able to get out of the legislature. And so that's why they're doing better. They're not, believe me, if this fund was doing 100%, we wouldn't even be talking about this. They could be giving them golden parachutes and nobody would care. But the fund, because now there's such a discrepancy here, and people can say, hey, like Bisbee, they're going to go underwater. And that's an interesting point. I want to just remind you. Let's say the city of Bisbee goes bankrupt. They have a lot of retired officers that are drawing their pension out of the pension fund. Bisbee goes Chapter 9 or goes bankrupt. What happens to those officers? My opinion is they'll still draw out of the pension fund, but there'll be no money going in from the city of Bisbee. And that'll exacerbate it even farther.
$17 million liability.
Yeah. And we have an $82 million liability here. And then that's another thing. And David and I, we really get torqued about this. This city of Prescott brought on 11 police and fire officers 5 weeks before the near Tier 3. They added to the city's liability over the lifetime of these officers, in my estimation, by $3 million. And then they've got the gall to ask the voters to increase the sales tax to bail the system out when they undercut it from the backside. And we questioned, we talked to city council. We said, why did you do this? We gave you a solution in Prop 124. Bring them on in the new tier. The new tier is so much better for the taxpayer. It's a 50-50 obligation. Has to be funded up front. The COLAs aren't there. Much better system. And it's a good retirement system because these guys will do well if they invest their money and they take part in Social Security or whatever. They'll do all right. They'll be pretty good. Their answer to us was, well, we public safety, we needed to hire these guys, and of course the town is burning down, and all this happy talk. And David just said, you're crazy. There's no crime wave here in Prescott. There's no firefighters go out on fire calls. You know how much percentage of their time? 4%. The rest it's all medical calls. Okay, so they could have waited and they didn't. And that showed me their bad faith. That's when I really started to turn against this system. Because I voted for Prop 124. I supported what they were trying to do. And the new Tier 3 was to be the answer. But they brought on 300 officers statewide. Think about that. To get them in under the old system.
So when these things go under, I mean, what concerns me is these guys will be kicked into like the federal pension benefit guarantee program. They'll get like $1,000 a month or something like that.
They're
The
gonna
whole
hurt.
thing goes under.
Hey, listen. My opinion is these guys don't care. The guys that bail out with their big drop monies, they're gone. They've already got their money. It's all these young guys and the younger workers that are going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And
Well, but then they say, well, we've got the constitutional guarantee. Somewhere that money's going to have to be raised somewhere, somehow, because the Constitution says they're entitled to their pensions and they can't.
a Superior Court judge ruled 3 weeks ago that the state of Arizona had to kick in $43 million to the EORP retirement fund. That $43 million is matched by the counties, okay, for their judges and everything. So they told the state legislature, you have to pay $43 million to bring the EORP fund, which is a separate fund managed by PSBRS, up to a sustainable level. That is a constitutional crisis. No judge can tell me as a legislator, I'm going to have to raise taxes. It can't happen. So this is where President Yarborough got in the act. He says, well, we don't have $43 million laying around, believe me. We scrape every penny because we have to have a balanced budget. And that dump in another $43 million, where's it going to come from? You can't squeeze blood out of a turnip. And so we're all the signs are there to see if you choose to see it. You choose to stick your head in the sand, yeah, you won't see anything. So, listen, I'll answer a couple questions and then I got to go. I mean,
Quick question. I was told the genesis of this entire thing actually started back in the 90s when the PSBRS board, talking about their investment strategy, not only didn't make their projected 7%, they actually lost a ridiculous amount of money. And then they doubled down on it and they kept losing money.
Right.
And over the span of about 10 years,
Right.
they actually lost 40% of their total investment to begin with. So they were already 40% in the hole
right.
before not making their targets.
They lost $1.5 billion on, this was at the last meeting, on 10 or 15 companies that went bankrupt themselves. And they were not able to get any money out of the investment money they put in. So they lost 1.5 billion, just boom. That's because of the poor investment.
They're not investing in mutual funds?
Their strategy, who knows what these guys do? I'm not an investment guy, I'm a layperson. All I know is the numbers. I know the liability we owe. I don't care what they say. Every year the liability gets greater. There's something wrong. There's something rotten there. There's something bad happening that we cannot close the gap. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know very, very, very little about investment myself, but wouldn't it make sense, as you were saying, the teachers union is 73%
funded.
approximately funded. Why are there not people looking across the nation over a course of 10, 20 years, the best rate of return, the highest limit of
Right.
funding, and transition to those companies that are having a better return?
Well,
I just can't wrap my
because
head around what.
the board is its own powerhouse entity. The legislature has no control on the board. And if we try to rein the board in, the unions get on us, and so they're a fiefdom unto themselves. And they are chagrined that they have to hand out the bad news about how bad the fund's doing. But what can we do to the board? We can't even bring in outside people to evaluate what they're doing. And that's how bad it is in this state. and nobody wants to talk about it, nobody really wants to hear about it, but 5 years from now, this thing will be coming down on us like a pile of rocks, or maybe sooner.
Well, if Prop 443 fails, it's going to be much sooner.
Yeah.
It's going to send a real message. And we were down there just this past week speaking to some, I won't name them, but the leadership, I'll just put it that way, and they said, we're watching the election in Prescott. And our next meeting is set after the election.
Right.
So,
if you want to, if you're not doing anything, you got some time, come down to the Capitol on August 31st at 10 o'clock, and we have our fourth or
Yes,
fifth
there is ad hoc meeting.
ad hoc committee meeting. We have the board come in and face us, and we're going to ask them questions. And we have the Goldwater Institute. We also have Arizona Tax Policy, Kevin McCarthy, come in and talk to us. And we get a countervailing viewpoint. Believe me, there are voices out there that say this system is unbelievably bad. But it's going to take leadership. And what I mean by that, David Stringer and I are little minnows in the pond. The governor's got to get involved in this, all right? The Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and the League of Cities and Towns, by the way, who does not want to get involved. The very organization that my city pays $60,000 a year to be a member don't want to touch this. You say, well, why? My God, Prescott's underwater. Why aren't they raising hell? Because the firefighters and police are so effective at grassroots. We had the mayor of Flagstaff at the last meeting, and she says, well, I don't know if I could support the League of Cities and Towns going into the constitutional change or provisions or trying to fix this system. And that's because they're so effective in their lobbying effort that there are going to be many cities that don't want to get involved. And so if the League of Cities represents all the Arizona cities in aggregate, if you don't have a 90, 80, 100% bubble up from the bottom, the League of Cities and Towns doesn't want to get involved.
so what I take it, and you're saying, Noel, is that the police and fire unions have gotten right down to
Absolutely.
grassroots level.
Absolutely.
And city council members.
Absolutely.
And county supervisors all over the state are in hock to the unions. They depend on that union contribution for
And that's the process we have. Listen, that's the process. They have every right to do that. And they are very effective. And they're effective for a couple of reasons, because psychologically, who wants to go against police and fire? Everybody wants, we realize the great job these guys do, the risks that they take. We want to support them, but we cannot support them to the point that it ruins the financial system for everybody. And that's what we're dealing with.
Thank you guys.
Yeah,
Really
thanks so
enjoyed
much for
that.
having us.
And,
Yeah, and by the way, we're doing written questions to PSPRS, so if you guys have any questions you want us to ask, let us know, and we'll formulate those questions for you.
Yes.